Welcome to Wheelock's Latin, chapter 29. In this chapter, we're going to continue our look at the subjunctive mood, and this time we're going to add the imperfect tense to our studies. We will also be looking at the subjunctive forms of the irregular verb sum and possum, and we'll also be adding the result clauses to our repertoire of the uses of the subjunctive. Let's do a quick review of subjunctive in the present tense from the last chapter. Now, if you remember, we took the regular indicative stem, and then we're going to do a vowel shift here, a vowel shift to make the subjunctive in the present tense. And the vowel shift corresponds to a little mnemonic device that we're using called he beat a giant. So the E is the first conjugation shift, the EA in beat is the second conjugation shift, A is the third conjugation shift, and IA is the fourth and third IO conjugation shift. And you can see the corresponding changes there for each of those paradigm verbs, laude, mona'a, aga, audia, and kapia. So again, there's that mnemonic device. Make sure you have that memorized. He beat a giant. Now, in this chapter, we're going to be studying the imperfect tense. It's actually quite easily formed, you'll be pleased to see. We're going to form the imperfect tense of the subjunctive simply by taking the infinitive and adding the present tense endings. So let's look at here the first conjugation paradigm verb laudo laudari. We take the infinitive laudari and simply add the mst mustis int. And this is actually true as well for the passive form. We take the laudari and add the aris ter mer mini inter. And this is a simple form for all of the conjugations. Second conjugation monao plus the endings, moneri plus the endings. Passive again, monao plus the endings, moneri plus aris ter. There you go. Third conjugation, ago ageri. We're going to take the ageri and again add the present endings, mst mustis int. And for the passive again, ageri plus aris ter mer mini inter. Fourth conjugation, audo auderi. Again, we take the auderi and add those present endings. Passive again, infinitive plus the aris ter mer mini inter. And finally, third conjugation, io, paradigm verb, caperi, plus the endings. So it's very easy to form these imperfect subjunctives. It's quite simple. I think you'll be pleased with how easy that is to recognize and to form. All right, now, how about translating the subjunctive imperfect tense? Now, keep in mind that the translation of the subjunctive will vary by usage. So far, we've learned the juice of subjunctive, and the purpose clause will be adding result clauses. Now, in the imperfect tense, auxiliaries like were and would, and in the example of purpose clauses, the word might can be used. It's important to recognize each clause type and know the proper translation of the subjunctive verb for each clause type. So make sure you are looking at these carefully. Now, the irregular sum and possum in the subjunctive. We're going to look at both the present and imperfect tenses for these. Now, if you remember, sum, esse, fui, futurum. Present tense is sumes, sumus, estis, sunt. And the imperfect is aram, aras, arat, aramis, aratus, arant. For possum, it is simply, in the present tense, possum, potest, potest, possumus, potestis, possunt, and the imperfect potaram, potaras, potarat, potaramus, potaratus, potarant. Now, for the subjunctive, this present form is just simply going to have to be memorized, and it is sim, sis, sit, simus, situs, sint. Sim, sis, sit, simus, situs, sint. So just have to memorize those. It's not too difficult, but you'll need to work on it. It's basically the SI plus your endings, MST, mustis, int. Just SI plus the endings, present tense endings. Now, for the imperfect tense in the subjunctive, we're going to use the same format that we've already used. We take the infinitive, in this case, esse, and add the endings, MST, mustis, int, leaving us with SM, assess, asset, assemus, assetis, assent. For possum, we're going to, in the present tense, take the pos that we normally add, but we're going to add that pos to the subjunctive form of sum. So we end up with possem, possis, posit, possimus, positus, posent. And again, holding true to form in the imperfect, we're going to take the infinitive posse and add the endings. We end up with possem, possess, posset, possemus, possetis, possent. All right, so those are the forms. Pretty simple. Just need to make sure you memorize those formats. Now, how about uses of the subjunctive? Now, we've already looked at the jussive use of the subjunctive, where it's the main verb in the sentence. And we've also looked at purpose clauses. This week, we're going to look at the result clauses. Quick review of purpose clauses here. The definition here, purpose clause is a subordinate clause indicating the objective of the action in the main clause. The purpose clause answers the question, why was it done? Now, how we recognize the purpose clause is we're going to look for a subjunctive clause introduced by ut, or if it's a negative purpose clause, introduced by ne, and it'll be stating the purpose of the action of the main verb. And if you remember from last chapter, the auxiliary may for present tense can be used, or might can be used for the imperfect tense. But it's better to translate to, or into, or in order to. So we've already studied the purpose clause last week, but only in the present tense. This week we're adding the imperfect tense. So keep in mind that rather than may for present tense, here in imperfect we may use might. But again, it may be better to say to or in order to. Here's an example. We study Latin in order to know more about Rome. What's the purpose of us studying? In order to know more about Rome. All right. Now, let's look at another example here, a purpose clause. In the present tense, we have hoc dicit ut eos evit. He says this, dicit hoc, ut, so that, or in order to, evit, help them, eos. He says this to help them. Now keep in mind here, again, present subjunctive will be used with the present tense in the main verb. And we can also translate this in a variety of ways. Little nota bene there, translate the subjunctive as an infinitive, to help, or you can translate it with may, or like it's an indicative with may or might if it's imperfect. May would be present tense. So this translation here, he says this to help them. Other valid translations for this same sentence are in order to help them, that he may help them, so that he may help them, in order that he may help them. All of those are valid translations, and notice the use of may because this is a present tense verb in the subjunctive. Now, in the imperfect tense, we're going to change the main verb and the subjunctive verb to imperfect tense. So we have hoc dixit ut eos evaret. He said, dixit hoc this, ut to, ut evaret, to help eos them. Again, imperfect subjunctive being used with the past tense main verb. Again, possible translations here. In order to help them, that he might help them, so that he might help them, in order that he might help them. Notice the use of might here because the subjunctive is in the imperfect tense. All right, so that is the jussive and the purpose clauses. Well, I should say it's the purpose clause. We've already studied this jussive. We're not reviewing that here. Right now, we're going to move on to the result clauses. Now, how do we recognize a result clause? Or I guess we should define it first. A result clause is a subordinate clause that shows the result of the action in the main clause. Purpose clause shows the purpose. Result clause shows the result. The result clause answers the question, what is the outcome? How do you recognize it? Well, we're going to look for a subjunctive clause introduced by ut. And for a negative result clause, unlike purpose that's going to use ne, a negative result clause is going to have the adverb non or some other negation. The main clause will likely have an adverb like ita, tam, sic, which means so, or it could have the adjective tantus aum, meaning so much or so great, indicating the degree and a result that will follow. Translation in the indicative mood, translate it in the indicative mood, but without may or might. So you do not use may or might in the result clause. Here's an example. We studied Latin so much that we passed the test. The result of us studying Latin was that we passed the test. This is the result clause. Now here's another example here. Tanta fecit ut urbem suaret. Fecit is he did, active indicative perfect verb. Tanta is our direct object. It's accusative, neuter, plural, so great thing since it's neuter. We have the conjunction ut introducing the secondary or subjunctive clause here. Urbem, which is our direct object, accusative singular, serving as a direct object of suaret, he saved. This is our active subjunctive imperfect verb. Notice that we have an imperfect subjunctive because we have a perfect or past tense main verb. So fecit, he did, so great, tanta, so great things, such great things. Ut, that, suaret urbem, he saved the city. Now compare this to a purpose clause. Very similar here. We have haec fecit ut urbem suaravit. Again, we have the same verb, fecit. This time we have the direct object as haec. This is accusative plural neuter, these things. But we still have ut urbem and suaret. So the only thing different here is the use of tanta versus the use of haec. And so what we end up with here is fecit haec. He did these things. Ut, so that. Suaret urbem, he might save the city. So the difference here, we're going to translate suaret as might because this is a purpose clause. And you tell the difference because of the context of the sentence. There's no use of tanta or sic or ita or tam, which are all adverbs that would indicate we have a result clause. So in this case, we have the purpose clause telling us the purpose of him doing these things so that he might save the city, as opposed to the result of him doing these great things, that he saved the city. Here's one more example. Here we go. Result clause equals subjunctive verb translated as the indicative, and a purpose clause, you're going to use may for present tense, or in this case, imperfect uses might. All right, one more example. Tam strenuu laborat ut multa perficiat. We got the main verb here, active present, he works. Adverbs tam, strenui energetically, and we have perficiat as the subjunctive verb in the subjunctive clause. Ut, of course, is introducing it. Multa is your direct object, accusative neuter plural. Laborat, he works so energetically. Tam strenua. He works so energetically. Ut, that. Perficiat, he accomplishes, present tense, many things, multa. Again, let's compare this with a very similar sentence, but this one is a purpose clause. Notice that Tom has been dropped off. Everything else is exactly the same. Exactly the same. That's terrible. It's exactly the same. So what do we end up here with this sentence? What we end up with is he works energetically so that he may, again may because this is a present tense subjunctive, he may accomplish many things. So again, one is the purpose clause, one is the result clause. And again, the active subjunctive present, we're translating it like it's indicative. Here in the purpose clause, we're going to use may because this is present tense. If it had been imperfect tense, we'd use might. Now just keep in mind the keys to translating the subjunctive mood. Number one, you're going to need to learn the definition for each clause type. You're going to need to be able to recognize each clause type, and you're going to need to know the proper translation of the subjunctive mood for each clause type. All right, so that'll wrap it up for this week. Make sure you study your vocabulary. We'll see you later this week.